Freemasonry or Masonry consists of fraternal organizations that trace their origins to the local fraternities of stonemasons, which from the end of the 14th century regulated the qualifications of stonemasons and their interaction with authorities and clients. The degrees of Freemasonry retain the three grades of medieval craft guilds, those of Apprentice, Journeyman or Fellow, and Master Mason. These are the degrees offered by Craft Freemasonry. Members of these organizations are known as Freemasons or Masons. There are additional degrees which vary with locality and jurisdiction, and are usually administered by different bodies than the craft degrees. The basic, local organizational unit of Freemasonry is the lodge. The lodges are usually supervised and governed at the regional level by a Grand Lodge or Grand Orient. There is no international, worldwide Grand Lodge that supervises all of Freemasonry. Each Grand Lodge is independent, and they do not necessarily recognize each other as being legitimate. Modern Freemasonry broadly consists of two main recognition groups. Regular Freemasonry insists that a volume of scripture is open in a working lodge, that every member profess belief in a deity, that no women are admitted, and that the discussion of religion and politics is banned. Continental Freemasonry is now the general term for the liberal jurisdictions who have removed some or all of these restrictions. Masonic Lodge. The Masonic Lodge is the basic organizational unit of Freemasonry. The lodge meets regularly to conduct the usual formal business of any small organization. In addition to business, the meeting may perform a ceremony to confer a Masonic degree or receive a lecture, which is usually on some aspect of Masonic history or ritual. At the conclusion of the meeting, the lodge might adjourn for a formal dinner or festive board, sometimes involving toasting and song. The bulk of Masonic ritual consists of degree ceremonies. Candidates for Freemasonry are progressively initiated into Freemasonry, first in the degree of entered apprentice. Sometime later, in a separate ceremony, they will be passed to the degree of fellow craft, and finally they will be raised to the degree of Master Mason. In all of these ceremonies, the candidate is entrusted with passwords, signs and grips peculiar to his new rank. Another ceremony is the annual installation of the master and officers of the lodge. In some jurisdictions, installed master is valued as a separate rank with its own secrets to distinguish its members. In other jurisdictions, the grade is not recognized, and no inner ceremony conveys new secrets during the installation of a new master of the lodge. Most lodges have some sort of social calendar, allowing Masons and the partners to meet in a less ritualized environment. Often coupled with these events is the obligation placed on every Mason to contribute to charity. This occurs at both Lodge and Grand Lodge level. Masonic charities contribute to many fields, from education to disaster relief. These private local lodges form the backbone of Freemasonry, and a Freemason will necessarily have been initiated into one of these. There also exist specialist lodges where Masons meet to celebrate anything from sport to Masonic research. The rank of Master Mason also entitles a Freemason to explore Masonry further through other degrees administered separately from the craft, or Blue Lodge degrees described here, but having a similar format to the meetings. There is very little consistency in Freemasonry. Because each Masonic jurisdiction is independent, each sets its own procedures. The wording of the ritual, the number of officers present, the layout of the meeting room, etc. varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. The officers of the lodge are elected or appointed annually. Every Masonic lodge has a master, 2 wardens, a secretary and a treasurer. There is also a tiler or outer guard, who is always present outside the door of a working lodge. Other officers vary between jurisdictions. Each Masonic lodge exists and operates according to a set of ancient principles known as the landmarks of Freemasonry. These principles have thus far eluded any universally accepted definition. Joining a lodge, candidates for Freemasonry will have met most active members of the lodge they are joining before they are initiated. The process varies between jurisdictions, but the candidate will typically have been introduced by a friend at a lodge social function, or it's some form of open evening in the lodge. In modern times, interested people often track down a local lodge through the internet. The onus is on candidates to ask to join, while candidates may be encouraged to ask. They are never invited. Once the initial inquiry is made, an interview usually follows to determine the candidate's suitability. If the candidate decides to proceed from here, the lodge ballots on the application before he can be accepted. The absolute minimum requirement of any body of Freemasons is that the candidate must be free, and considered to be of good character. There is usually an age requirement, varying greatly between Grand Lodges, and capable of being overridden by a dispensation from the Grand Lodge. The underlying assumption is that the candidate should be a mature adult. In addition, most Grand Lodges require the candidate to declare a belief in a supreme being. In a few cases, the candidate may be required to be of a specific religion. The form of Freemasonry most common in Scandinavia, for example, accepts only Christians. At the other end of the spectrum, liberal or continental Freemasonry, exemplified by the Grand Orient de France, does not require a declaration of belief in any deity, and accepts atheists. During the ceremony of initiation, the candidate is expected to swear to fulfill certain obligations as a Mason. In the course of 3 degrees, new Masons will promise to keep the secrets of the degree from lower degrees and outsiders, and to support a fellow Mason in distress. There is instruction as to the duties of a Freemason, but on the whole, Freemasons are left to explore the craft in the manner they find most satisfying. Some will further explore the ritual and symbolism of the craft. Others will focus their involvement on the social side of the lodge, while still others will concentrate on the charitable functions of the lodge. Organization. Grand Lodges and Grand Orients are independent and sovereign bodies that govern Masonry in a given country, state, or geographical area. There is no single overarching governing body that presides over worldwide Freemasonry. Connections between different jurisdictions depend solely on mutual recognition. Freemasonry, as it exists in various forms all over the world, has a membership estimated by the United Grand Lodge of England at around 6 million worldwide. The fraternity is administratively organized into independent Grand Lodges, each of which governs its own Masonic jurisdiction, which consists of subordinate lodges. The largest single jurisdiction, in terms of membership, is the United Grand Lodge of England. The Grand Lodge of Scotland and Grand Lodge of Ireland have approximately 150,000 members. In the United States, total membership is just under 2 million. Recognition, amity and regularity. Relations between Grand Lodges are determined by the concept of recognition. Each head lodge maintains a list of other head lodges that it recognizes. When 2 Grand Lodges recognize and are in Masonic communication with each other, they are said to be in amity, and the brethren of each may visit each other's lodges and interact Masonically. When 2 Grand Lodges are not in amity, intervisitation is not allowed. There are many reasons why one Grand Lodge will withhold or withdraw recognition from another, but the 2 most common are exclusive jurisdiction and regularity. Exclusive jurisdiction. Exclusive jurisdiction is a concept whereby only one Grand Lodge will be recognized in any geographical area. If two Grand Lodges claim jurisdiction over the same area, the other head lodges will have to choose between them, and they may not all decide to recognize the same one. Exclusive jurisdiction can be waived when the two overlapping Grand Lodges of themselves in amity and agree to shared jurisdiction. Regularity is a concept based on adherence to Masonic landmarks, the basic membership requirements, tenets and rituals of the craft. Each head lodge sets its own definition of what these landmarks are, and thus what is regular and what is irregular. Essentially, every head lodge will hold that its landmarks are regular, and judge other Grand Lodges based on those. If the differences are significant, one Grand Lodge may declare the other irregular, and withdraw or withhold recognition. The most commonly shared rules for recognition are those given by the United Grand Lodge of England in 1929. The Grand Lodge should be established by an existing regular head lodge, or by at least 3 regular lodges. A belief in a supreme being in Scripture is a condition of membership. Initiates should take the vows on that Scripture. Only men can be admitted, and no relationship exists with mixed lodges. The Grand Lodge has complete control over the first 3 degrees, and is not subject to another body. All lodges shall display a volume of Scripture with the square and compasses while in session. There is no discussion of politics or religion. Antient landmarks, customs and usages observed. Other degrees, orders and bodies. Blue Lodge Freemasonry offers only 3 traditional degrees, and in most jurisdictions, the rank of past or installed master. Master Masons are also able to extend the Masonic experience by taking further degrees, independent bodies approved by their own head lodge. The ancient and accepted Scottish Rite is a system of 33 degrees administered by a local or national Supreme Council. This system is popular in North America and in continental Europe. The York Rite, with a similar range, administers 3 orders of Masonry, namely the Royal Arch, Cryptic Masonry and Knights Templar. In Britain, separate bodies administer each order. Freemasons are encouraged to join the Holy Royal Arch, which is linked to Mark Masonry in Scotland and Ireland, but separate in England. Templar and Cryptic Masonry also exist. In the Nordic countries, the Swedish Rite is dominant. A variation of it is also used in parts of Germany. Ritual and symbolism. Freemasonry describes itself as a beautiful system of morality, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. The symbolism is mainly, but not exclusively, drawn from the manual tools of stonemasons, the square and compasses, the level and plumb rule, the trowel, among others. A moral lesson is attached to each of these tools, although the assignment is by no means consistent. The meaning of the symbolism is taught and explored through ritual. All Freemasons begin the journey in the craft by being progressively initiated, passed and raised into the 3 degrees of craft, or Blue Lodge Masonry. During these 3 rituals, the candidate is progressively taught the meanings of the lodge symbols, and entrusted with grips, signs and words to signify to other Masons that he has been so initiated. The initiations are part allegory and part lecture, and revolve around the construction of the Temple of Solomon, and the artistry and death of his chief architect, Hiram Abiff. The degrees are those of entered apprentice, fellow craft and master mason, while many different versions of these rituals exist, with at least 2 different lodge layouts and versions of the Hiram myth. Each version is recognizable to any Freemason from any jurisdiction. In some jurisdictions, the main themes of each degree are illustrated by tracing boards. These painted depictions of Masonic themes are exhibited in the lodge according to which degree is being worked, and are explained to the candidate to illustrate the legend and symbolism of each degree. The idea of Masonic brotherhood probably descends from a 16th century legal definition of a brother as one who has taken an oath of mutual support. to another. Accordingly, Masons swear at each degree to keep the contents of the degree secret, and to support and protect the brethren unless they have broken the law. In most lodges the oath or obligation is taken on a volume of sacred law, whichever book of divine revelation is appropriate to the religious beliefs of the individual brother. In progressive continental Freemasonry, books other than scripture are permissible, a cause of rupture between Grand Lodges. History. Origins. Since the middle of the 19th century, Masonic historians have sought the origins of the movement in a series of similar documents known as the Old Charges, dating from the Regius Poem in about 1425 to the beginning of the 18th century. Alluding to the membership of a lodge of operative Masons, they relate a mythologized history of the craft, the duties of its grades, and the manner in which oaths of fidelity are to be taken on joining. The 15th century also sees the first evidence of ceremonial regalia. There is no clear mechanism by which these local trade organizations became today's Masonic lodges, but the earliest rituals and passwords known from operative lodges around the turn of the 17th–18th centuries show continuity with the rituals developed in the later 18th century by accepted as speculative Masons, as those members who did not practice the physical craft came to be known. The minutes of the Lodge of Edinburgh No. 1 in Scotland show a continuity from an operative lodge in 1598 to a modern speculative lodge. It is reputed to be the oldest Masonic lodge in the world. The first Grand Lodge, the Grand Lodge of London and Westminster, was founded on the 24th of June 1717, when 4 existing London lodges met for a joint dinner. Many English lodges joined the new regulatory body, which itself entered a period of self-publicity and expansion. However, many lodges could not endorse changes which some lodges of the GLE made to the ritual, and a few of these formed a rival head lodge on the 17th of July 1751, which they called the Antient Grand Lodge of England. These two Grand Lodges vied for supremacy until the moderns promised to return to the ancient ritual. They united on the 27th of December 1813 to form the United Grand Lodge of England. The Grand Lodge of Ireland and the Grand Lodge of Scotland were formed in 1725 and 1736 respectively, although neither persuaded all of the existing lodges in their countries to join for many years. North America. The earliest known American lodges were in Pennsylvania. The collector for the Port of Pennsylvania, John Moore, wrote of attending lodges there in 1715, 2 years before the formation of the first Grand Lodge in London. The Premier Head Lodge of England appointed a provincial Grand Master for North America in 1731, based in Pennsylvania. Other lodges in the colony obtained authorizations from the later Antient Grand Lodge of England, the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and the Grand Lodge of Ireland, which was particularly well represented in the travelling lodges of the British Army. Many lodges came into existence with no warrant from any head lodge, applying and paying for their authorization only after they were confident of their own survival. After the American Revolution, independent U.S. Grand Lodges formed themselves within each state. Some thought was briefly given to organizing an overarching Grand Lodge of the United States, with George Washington as the first Grand Master, but the idea was short-lived. The various state Grand Lodges did not wish to diminish their own authority by agreeing to such a body. Prince Hall Freemasonry. Prince Hall Freemasonry exists because of the refusal of early American lodges to admit African Americans. In 1775, an African American named Prince Hall, along with 14 other African Americans, was initiated into a British military lodge with a warrant from the Grand Lodge of Ireland. having failed to obtain admission from the other lodges in Boston. When the military lodge left North America, those 15 men were given the authority to meet as a lodge, but not to initiate Masons. In 1784, these individuals obtained a warrant from the Premier Head Lodge of England and formed African Lodge No. 459. When the UGLE was formed in 1813, all US-based lodges were stricken from the rolls, due largely to the War of 1812. Thus, separated from both UGLE and any concordantly recognized U.S. Grand Lodge, African Lodge retitled itself as the African Lodge No. 1 and became a de facto Grand Lodge. As with the rest of U.S. Freemasonry, Prince Hall Freemasonry soon grew and organized on a head lodge system for each state. Widespread segregation in 19th and early 20th century North America made it difficult for African Americans to join lodges outside of Prince Hall jurisdictions, and impossible for inter-jurisdiction recognition between the parallel U.S. Masonic authorities. By the 1980s, such discrimination was a thing of the past, and today most U.S. Grand Lodges recognize the Prince Hall counterparts, and the authorities of both traditions are working towards full recognition. The United Grand Lodge of England has no problem with recognizing Prince Hall head lodges, while celebrating the heritage as lodges of Black Americans. Prince Hall is open to all men regardless of race or religion. Emergence of continental Freemasonry. English Freemasonry spread to France in the 1720s, first as lodges of expatriates and exiled Jacobites, and then as distinctively French lodges which still follow the ritual of the moderns. From France and England, Freemasonry spread to most of continental Europe during the course of the 18th century. The Grande Loge de France formed under the Grand Mastership of the Duke of Clermont, who exercised only nominal authority. His successor, the Duke of Orléans, reconstituted the central body as the Grand Orient de France in 1773. Briefly eclipsed during the French Revolution, French Freemasonry continued to grow in the next century. Schism. The ritual form on which the Grand Orient of France was based was abolished in England in the events leading to the formation of the United Grand Lodge of England in 1813. However, the two jurisdictions continued in amity until events of the 1860s and 1870s drove a seemingly permanent wedge between them. In 1868, the Supreme Council of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of the state of Louisiana appeared in the jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of Louisiana, recognized by the Grand Orient de France, but regarded by the elder body as an invasion of the jurisdiction. The new Scottish Rite body admitted blacks, and the resolution of the Head Orient the following year that neither color, race, nor religion could disqualify a man from Masonry prompted the Grand Lodge to withdraw recognition, and it persuaded other American Grand Lodges to do the same. A dispute during the Lausanne Congress of Supreme Councils of 1875 prompted the Grand Orient de France to commission a report by a Protestant pastor, which concluded that, as Freemasonry was not a religion, it should not require a religious belief. The new constitutions read, its principles are absolute liberty of conscience and human solidarity, the existence of God and the immortality of the soul being struck out. It is possible that the immediate objections of the United Grand Lodge of England were at least partly motivated by the political tension between France and Britain at the time. The result was the withdrawal of recognition of the Grand Orient of France by the United United Grand Lodge of England, a situation that continues today. Not all French lodges agreed with the new wording. In 1894, lodges favoring the compulsory recognition of the great architect of the universe formed the Grande Loge de France. In 1913, the United Grand Lodge of England recognized a new head lodge of regular Freemasons, a Grand Lodge that follows a similar rite to Anglo-American Freemasonry with a mandatory belief in a deity. There are now 3 strands of Freemasonry in France, which extend into the rest of continental Europe. Liberal principles of liberty of conscience and laïcité, particularly the separation of the church and state. Traditional Old French ritual with a requirement for a belief in a supreme being. Regular, standard Anglo-American ritual, mandatory belief in supreme being. The term Continental Freemasonry was used in Mackay's 1873 Encyclopedia of Freemasonry to designate the lodges on the continent of Europe, which retain many usages which have either been abandoned by, or never were observed in, the lodges of England, Ireland, and Scotland, as well as the United States of America. Today, it is frequently used to refer to only the liberal jurisdictions typified by the Grand Orient de France. The majority of Freemasonry considers the liberal strand to be irregular, and thus withhold recognition. For the continental lodges, however, having a different approach to Freemasonry was not a reason for severing Masonic ties. In 1961, an umbrella organization, Centre de liaison et d'information des puissances mécaniques signataires de l'appel de Strasbourg was set up, which today provides a forum for most of these Grand Lodges and Grand Orients worldwide. Included in the list of over 70 Grand Lodges and Grand Orients are representatives of all 3 of the above categories, including mixed and women's organizations. The United Grand Lodge of England does not communicate with any of these jurisdictions, and expects its allies to follow suit. This creates the distinction between Anglo-American and continental Freemasonry. Freemasonry and women. The status of women in the old guilds and corporations of medieval Masons remains uncertain. The principle of femme sole allowed a widow to continue the trade of her husband, but its application had wide local variations, ranging from full membership of a trade body to limited trade by deputation to approved members of the body. In Masonry, the small available evidence points to the less empowered end of the scale. At the dawn of the Grand Lodge era, during the 1720s, James Anderson composed the first printed constitutions for Freemasons, the basis for most subsequent constitutions, which specifically excluded women from Freemasonry. As Freemasonry spread, continental Masons began to include the ladies in lodges of adoption, which worked 3 degrees with the same names as the men's but different content. The French officially abandoned the experiment in the early 19th century. Later organizations with a similar aim emerged in the United States, but distinguished the names of the degrees from those of male Masonry. Maria de Raismes was initiated into Freemasonry in 1882, then resigned to allow her lodge to rejoin the head lodge, having failed to achieve acceptance from any Masonic governing body. She and Georges Martin started a mixed Masonic lodge that actually worked Masonic ritual. Annie Besant spread the phenomenon to the English-speaking world. Disagreements over ritual led to the formation of exclusively female bodies of Freemasons in England, which spread to other countries. Meanwhile, the French had reinvented adoption as an all-female lodge in 1901, only to cast it aside again in 1935. The lodges, however, continued to meet, which gave rise, in 1959, to a body of women practicing continental Freemasonry. In general, continental Freemasonry is sympathetic to Freemasonry amongst women, dating from the 1890s when French lodges assisted the emergent co-Masonic movement by promoting enough of the members to the 33rd degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite to allow them, in 1899, to form their own Grand Council, recognised by the other continental Grand Councils of the Rite. The United Grand Lodge of England issued a statement in 1999 recognising the two women's Grand Lodges are to be regular in all but the participants. While they were not, therefore, recognized as regular, they were part of Freemasonry in general. The attitude of most regular Anglo-American Grand Lodges remains that women Freemasons are not legitimate Masons.